whoa, wait a minute, how can I make this decision? And they gave me a deadline because I had to decide by the end of that week. Today, I want to talk about a couple of things. Yesterday, I went surfing, so we'll talk about that. Also, go into kind of my career decision framework of when I went through two of the toughest decisions that I've ever had to make in my entire career. And then I also want to get into kind of my faith journey in all of this because I think it's actually really important to talk about philosophy and religion because that's so interconnected with my upbringing and I think a lot of other Pacific Islanders and Polynesians out there. So that's kind of the plan that we'll cover today. But first, honestly, I just want to talk about how yesterday I went surfing. It was probably the fourth time I've ever been surfing before, and this time was very very tough. So the first time I went surfing was in Morocco. I was visiting a friend who was studying abroad, and surfing classes out there were super super cheap. So I was like, okay, why not? Why not just go surf? Had a great time, and that's when I kind of like fell in love with surfing, but not enough to like go do it on my own, just enough to like kind of do it as a hobby or something. If it comes up, then it comes up. But yesterday I went surfing for the first time in a long time, and it was honestly so brutal. Like these California waves were honestly so tough. One of the hardest things about surfing is just the fear of the waves. There was this time when I was a kid and we went to this beach down in SoCal, and these waves were so massive. But I was a little kid out there in the waves, and this massive wave comes and it just like basically swallows me whole. And I'm just like over there, like literally in a washing machine, just going back and forth. It was so bad. Literally, my entire pants and underwear flew off. So while I was underwater, I went and caught it and had to put it on, all the while like holding my breath, trying to get like a gasp of air. And I'm like going up to the surface, and as soon as I hit the surface, I would like try to breathe in as much as possible. But I was absolutely so cooked. And so after that day, I had this massive fear of waves. And so this fear just kind of creeps up every now and then. And yesterday, it kind of creeped up of like we went surfing and it was so tough because these waves were pretty massive. And even though I went out there and probably got wiped out literally 3 times in a row, I think it's something special to still fail forward. It's like one of the biggest mottos of my entire last season of getting to 100K is just failing forward. Like, even though I'm going to go out there and wipe out again and again and again, that really doesn't matter because I'm learning through each of those failures. And although I will probably go and fall 100 more times, like I will learn through each one of those and get better at surfing every single time. So that was really the mindset that I think has honestly helped me so much, like get to this point. But it's still so tough because even though I've like built this muscle, I still have to build the muscle over again because this fear always creeps up. And I think this gets into another really important point actually about the fear of failure. And that has to do with a story about Tinder, which I'll get to near the end of this episode. But for now, I really want to talk about this decision framework that has helped me make two of the toughest career decisions of my life. First was when I was an intern last year at this other company, this other startup that I was working at. So I was an intern. I really wanted to get a full time role after I graduated, but they kind of didn't do that. They kind of didn't give offers during the summer of their junior year going into their senior year. So I started to apply to other places, like places in SF. And so this company in SF actually got to the final round interview. And as soon as I got to the final round, the Utah company gave me a full time offer. So I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, how can I make this decision? And they gave me a deadline because I had to decide by the end of that week. So I could either stick through the interview process and continue with the SF interview. Potentially, they would pay me a lot more, and I would drop out of school and then move to SF and do all the SF startup things. Or I could stick with the Utah startup, finish up school, and then come back after I graduated. So that was one of the first tough decisions that I had to make. I ended up deciding to stick with the Utah startup. I went back to school and worked remotely for them full time. And then the next tough decision was after I actually graduated. And so this was when all my friends ended up getting offers to come out here to SF, San Francisco. But I was super torn because I was kind of interested, maybe exploring opportunities of coming back out to SF after I graduated, but I was supposed to return to Utah to that startup that I agreed to come back for. But I threw my resume around and got a couple interviews, and literally 2 weeks later, after the first round interview, I got a full-time offer at an SF startup. So that was another major decision where I had to decide, am I going to stick with the Utah startup, or am I going to go to SF with all my friends and then go see what the SF startup life is all about. Now, obviously, I chose the San Francisco startup and I'm out here in SF, but the reasons that I chose each of those decisions, I think is actually fairly insightful and could be helpful for someone listening out there. It's what I call the 4 C's: cash, craft, connections, and calling. Now, these are kind of the four factors that at least has helped me try to weigh this out and make the decision that I think was best for me. So the first one is cash. This one is super straightforward. How well off are you going to be? How well is this going to set you up for now and then for the future financially? Obviously, SF usually won that battle. They paid way, way more than Utah. But of course, you have to adjust for like cost of living and stuff. But honestly, for me, that didn't really play a huge role because I'm pretty frugal. I live pretty cheaply. The second C is craft. Now, this has a lot to do with the skills that I would gain. And really, kind of my North Star in a lot of this decision was how much I was going to learn. Like, what new things will I be able to do coming out of this experience? The third C is connections, and this is who I surround myself with. I think this is one of like the most cliche quotes out there, but it's still so true. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that is one of the truest statements ever, honestly. Because even if that's through podcasts or interviews or friends or roommates or coworkers, whoever I spend the most time with, I am going to become more like them because they make this environment easier for certain habits rather than others. So this is something that I actually think is super, super important. And another factor that I think goes in with connections is expanding the surface area of luck. And it's something that I think is actually super common in SF. Today I'm going to this yoga session, and at this random yoga session, there's going to be some insanely cracked people there. Now, obviously, I'm not going just like go and network or whatever. Like a lot of my friends are going, so it's like a vibe. But it's just one of the examples of how the surface area for luck kind of just expands. There was another time where we went out one night and we met one of the other guys who actually sold his company for like a lot of money. And so it was like the most random thing in the world, and I think SF is kind of this hub for luck. And the fourth C, which I think is honestly the most important, is calling. This kind of connects to one of the most pivotal and important philosophy mindsets, if you want to call it that I've ever had, which I call the dream self. And for those of you who don't know, basically the dream self is this thought experiment. Imagine yourself in your deathbed. Imagine the character traits and beliefs and habits and mindsets that that person embodies. I think the goal of this whole life, at least one of the goals, is to get as close to that person as we can. And the goal isn't actually to achieve that person. It's not actually to become that person fully, because I think there's always this sense of pursuit. Because if we ever actually do achieve that person, then either we set our standard too low or we're kidding ourselves and we're lying to ourselves saying that, oh, we actually achieved it when we never have. But I think a lot of this is like the myth of Sisyphus, where we're rolling this boulder up the hill and we're trying our hardest to become like this dream self. And even though we will never get there, and even though we might make it to the top of this hill and this boulder will go all the way back down and we have to repeat that again and again and again, even though we will never get to this end goal of having the boulder up the hill or becoming the dream self, a lot of life, I think, is about the journey. It's about the character and the person that we become along the way of pushing the boulder up the hill, along the way of pursuing that dream self. And that's honestly one of the most pivotal things that has helped me in my life, especially as I'm coming to these very, very tough decisions where I have to decide for myself. which one is going to help me toward my dream self? Which decision is going to help me build the character traits, build the virtues, build the habits, build the beliefs, build the mindset that is going to help me become the person that I want to become. So those are the four C's, and the way I would kind of lay them out is in four quadrants with two axes. On one axis you have practical and purpose, and then on the other axis you have internal and external. Now first with the practical, you have the two C's, which is craft and cash. Now the practical side are things that are very tangibly going to serve you in life. The craft is like very tangibly the skills that you will gain. And obviously, cash, that's like literally just money to be gained. So, craft is practical internal, and then cash is practical external. And on the other side, we have purpose. And this one I think is way, way more important. And we have calling and connections. So, purpose and external is connections. Like these are the people we surround ourselves with. I think they call this like the happiness study, where they track the biggest differentiator of people who lived super long lives and longevity. And it wasn't like all these things that Brian Johnson is doing, all these random life hacks that he's trying to pursue. It was actually just the connections that people have, like the close connection that they have with their spouse or with whoever they're around. People, I think, is super, super important. And of course, the other side, which is purpose and internal, is your calling. What is my mission that I want to be here for? Now, a lot of this will sound pie in the sky, especially for the purpose, this calling piece that I'm kind of adding in here. But I think it's actually super important for people to figure out like what I want to do with all of it. Because although I think it's super easy to go about life and be like, oh, like I can put in all these hours, it's very, very different when you actually have the sense of higher purpose or the sense of I am actually called here to do something. It's so, so much easier to work 12, 14, 16-hour work days when you have that calling. At least for me, it is. And with calling, I think this kind of gets to something that I've honestly been thinking about for years now. And it's this idea of religion and philosophy. It's how I got into all of this in the first place, because I think calling and your religion or whatever you believe are actually like super connected, which is something that I've been debating about whether I'd actually want to share it more publicly. But I think it's pretty important. For one, religion has been super impactful for me, and philosophy has been super impactful for me. So I definitely would have told this whole story for sure, like in the future. So why not just tell it now? And also, I hope that someone else out there, like especially other Pacific Islanders, I think someone out there can relate to some of the things that I will share in my whole faith journey. But basically, I've gone on this super roundabout faith journey. I was raised Mormon or LDS. So as a kid, I always just believed in what my parents did. But eventually, I came to this moment where I had to decide for myself, do I actually believe what my parents believe? And so I became a super, super hard atheist. I just like threw out everything out the window, like no God, no nothing. And then I actually like started diving deeper into all these arguments and actually found some evidence for Christianity and Mormonism and the LDS church. And so I swung back hard the other way. And I was like, actually, I do believe in all this stuff. So I became a super, super strong member. And then going into college, I kind of dove deeper into the arguments and I was like, wait a minute, actually, I'm agnostic, just to say I don't know. I don't know whether there's a God or whether there's not a God. I'm just gonna say, you know what? I have no idea. But going into college, probably by sophomore, junior year, there was this book that actually changed my life and this whole thought process that actually gave me the confidence and the rationality to say, like, you know what? I think it actually could be rational to take the steps toward believing in God, toward believing in Christianity. So where I find myself now is I would say that I am trying to live a Christian life. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say as I'm a super devout Christian and I'm praying every day and like reading the scriptures and going to church on Sundays, like all these other things that goes with being a Christian. But what I would say is that I'm trying to live this Christian life. And I think there's a pretty big differentiator there. And the big differentiator is honestly one of the strongest philosophical arguments that I have found for living the Christian life. Now, it's super easy for me to describe this whole journey and be like, oh, I was an atheist for a while, and then I was Christian, and then I went back and forth, and then I was like, it's so easy for me to explain that. But actually living through it was genuinely one of the toughest things. Because as Pacific Islanders, as Tongan, our religion is so interconnected with our family, with our culture. And so for me to turn away from that, for me to say, you know what, I don't believe in this thing, for me to say, you know what, I'm not going to go and serve a mission is actually one of the toughest things to do. Because in a lot of ways, it makes you feel like an outcast. It's not so obvious where people will come and be like, oh, you're the person who doesn't believe, like you're the non-believer, this and that, but it's these slight things that you truly know is like, "Oh, did you serve a mission?" And like, "No." And then it's like, "Oh, you're one of those guys." And when I was first going through this, it was genuinely one of the toughest things. Over time, I've just learned that I truly don't care about what other people have to think. Now that's a whole nother story. Like I think that's a whole nother lesson to be had because other people's opinions really don't matter in the long run. Now the opinions of my family and the opinions of people who are important to me, like of course that'll matter, but for others, I really couldn't care less. And I say that so genuinely. It's not like to disrespect them in any way. It's just to say that I don't have the mental capacity to care about enough people's opinions of me for me to allow that to dictate what I want to do. I honestly think going into like the very, very deep philosophical arguments that I've kind of explored and all the people that I've explored would probably take tons and tons of hours, honestly. But I think maybe the most succinct way I can put it is I will explain kind of the big dominoes that I've had to overcome or had to knock over for me to get to this point where I'm at now to say that I am trying to live a Christian life. And there's kind of a couple big pillars. The first is you have to establish that there is some type of objective truth in the world. Now, the way to get there is super roundabout. You can like kind of explore that answer for yourself, but that's the first big domino is there some type of objective truth? After you get there, you can kind of start exploring like some of these deeper arguments of like, is there some type of higher power? Now, not necessarily that there is a God, but is there some type of higher power for how we even got here in the first place? It could be any type of higher power. It could be like any type of God and multiple gods, whatever. But is there some type of higher power? And then once you get to that point of like whether these extraordinary things can actually come about, whether these miracles are actually possible, then you can kind of start exploring the historical evidences for this guy called Jesus. And that's where you start kind of diving into all of these manuscripts and all these arguments for Jesus, for Christianity. So those were kind of the big dominoes that I've had to explore and overcome. But the reason I think I've thought so much about this is because it comes back to a question that I've been trying to explore my entire life. Still am, honestly. Is it rational to believe in God? I think it is. I used to believe, like tons of other atheists out there, because I was an atheist myself, that believing in God requires this leap of faith that is completely irrational, that goes completely against the evidence. And of course, if you look at all the scientific whatever, there's no way that some God can exist. Like that just doesn't make sense. But a definition for faith that I honestly love is believing with the evidence and acting as if it's true. The reason I love this is because it doesn't completely throw out evidence. I think evidence is actually super important, at least for me, because you can honestly put your faith in whatever you want. Like I can put my faith in the most random things in the world that have no grounding into what is actually true in reality. And that's what I think is super important is like what's actually true in reality. So that's the reason I hold evidence actually to this very high standard. But it's not the only thing that I hold to because there actually requires this certain step of acting as if it's true. Because I can go and do all the mind-bending historical evidences and analyses that I want to do, but in so many cases there will be doubt. In so many cases it can only get me 90, 70, 50% of the way to truth, but it requires this another leap of acting as if it's true. Because if I live my whole life where I need this 100% evidence of like without a shadow of a doubt this is absolutely true, then I will go throughout my entire life without anything because I'm not willing to commit myself with the evidence. because there's still this 10%, 30% doubt that I still could be wrong. And so that's why I think even in the face of doubt, even in the face of counter evidence, we can still take this leap of faith where we believe with the evidence, but we act as if it's true. And one of the honestly most outlandish connections I've had from this idea of religion and faith and believing whether there's a God or whether there's not is Tinder. It's so random, but the founder of Tinder is actually a Northwestern alumni. So one day he came in to speak and he had this like little fireside chat and he was kind of explaining the founding story of Tinder. The real reason behind Tinder isn't hooking up. It's actually this very deep philosophical insight that has helped me throughout my entire life. If you imagine yourself, you walk into a room, you see someone who you think is attractive. What's the number one thing that would keep you from going to that person? That thing is failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of being wrong. So, the idea behind Tinder is what if we have this double sided confirmation where I know that this person is interested in me and I know that I'm interested in them. So, the barrier of me going up and talking with them is actually lowered way more. And that is the unique insight behind Tinder. And I say this because it gets to the difference between avoiding failure and pursuing success. When I say that, it sounds like the exact same thing. If I'm pursuing success and obviously I'm avoiding failure, they're literally the same thing. But if you live your life according to one of those standards, then you actually go about life a very different way. Because you can imagine two scenarios. One scenario where I go into the room and I see the attractive person. I'm like, man, I think that person's super attractive, but I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of failure. And so I live my life trying to avoid failure. I don't go up and talk to that person. On the other scenario, I go into the room, I see the attractive person, and because I am willing to pursue success, and on this way of pursuing success, I'm willing to go and talk to that person. And even though they might reject me, and even though this might be a failure, I'm willing to take that risk for the off chance and for the opportunity of pursuing success. And this is one of the core insights that has helped me in this whole faith journey. Because for the longest time, I was an agnostic. I said, you know what? I looked at all the evidences for Christianity, for atheism, and honestly, atheism seems pretty compelling. Christianity also seems pretty compelling, and I just really don't know between the two. So I'm just gonna withhold judgment. I'm just gonna say, you know what, I don't know. And the reason I did that is because of my fear of failure. Because I was trying to avoid failure at all costs, because I didn't want to be wrong. But the key insight is what if I actually take this step? What if I actually pursue success, pursue some type of truth? What if I go and talk to the attractive person in the room? What will happen? And what will happen is this opportunity will open up. This opportunity that previously was closed because of my fear of failure, this opportunity will open up of me getting closer to some type of truth, of me getting closer to some type of success, because I'm willing to put myself out there and I'm willing to get down on my knees and pray and open up the scriptures and read and be wrong. Because honestly, I'm still on this path. So it very well could be true that a year from now, 5 years from now, I end up deciding, you know what, Christianity isn't right. You know what, this LDS church, it might be a fraud, it might not be, and I end up dedicating my whole life for it, or I end up going super hard atheist. Whatever I end up doing in the future, I know that if I go down this path of exploring Christianity more and giving it this fair shake, giving it this fair chance of whether it's true or not, that I will get closer to some type of truth. And so that's the reason why now I'm committing myself to living a Christian life. Now, I think a very important caveat to say is that the evidence will only take me so far. And this is something that I've had to realize the hard way. The evidences and arguments and whatever will only get me so far as to weighing out the pros and cons of taking a belief and whether it's true or not. But what it doesn't get to is building a genuine relationship with God, with Heavenly Father. And that's something that I truly want to work on. And so we'll see how these next couple years go by and how everything goes. But I think that is honestly one of the most pivotal stories that, at least for me, has helped me a ton. So maybe someone else watching this can connect to something that I said. But I will see you guys next week. Tao Toxio.